Hello, 2024. Like a lot of people, I find myself getting caught up in the desire to make some goals, make some resolutions, and just try to find ways of adding joy to this year in ways that maybe I missed last year. I'll be honest that one of the goals that I've set for myself is a bit of a cheat because it's something I've been doing for a very long time. My goal is to continue to do a lot of reading. As you can see behind me from the small selection of books in my library, um, I do a lot of reading, and I enjoy it, and it always brings joy. One of the things I'd like to do this year is be more present in my reading. I tend to skim a lot. It's one of the reasons I can get one ways I've gone through quite a number of books over the years, and I just felt this year I'd like to be more present. And one of the ways in which I want to do that is to kind of share with the internet, the ether out there, kind of what I've been reading. I know there's an awful lot of YouTube channels with book reviews. In fact, even before doing this, I just took some time to go through, watch a few of those. Really interesting stuff and really kind of cool things that people are reading and really glad, really neat to see. And of course, most of them are designed for readers of fiction, YA novels, fantasy, that sort of thing, which is really cool, something I need to do more of. And certainly I will be checking on some of those channels again throughout the year just to spend more time reading fiction and sort of just reading books for the sake of it. But me personally, I find great joy in reading academic style books. In fact, the books behind me are largely academic books, mostly published by university presses. I enjoy them because I find that's a way of keeping my mind sharp and keep myself sort of connected with a larger world that I think I would miss otherwise. And so what I plan on doing this year, occasionally, I don't have any plan to do this like as a monthly basis or a weekly basis. Definitely not. I'm busy enough as it is. But certainly throughout the year is to share some of the books that I have read, some of the academic books, and hopefully that if you've enjoyed my review of them, if you've enjoyed what I've had to say, some of my insights or just things like that, that you would be willing to check out the book and hopefully that those books get a wider audience. So this year, so for 2024, the first book that I like to review is a very slim volume called Consorts of the Caliphs, Women and the Court of Baghdad. It's written originally by Ibn Asir, who was a court historian, law librarian, who lived, according to the Arabic calendar, from 593 to 674, or in the Judeo-Christian calendar, from the years 1197 to 1276. His book, Consort of the Caliphs, is a fascinating volume. As I said, it's slim. The actual text is only works out to be about 87 pages. The rest of it are footnotes and other scholarly apparatus that sort of provide context, particularly for an audience like myself that is really unfamiliar with Arab, with Arab and Islamic history. And so just that alone makes it a very fascinating read because it provides all kinds of really interesting insights and all kinds of really interesting things that I certainly wasn't aware of. So the book itself, the Consorts of the Caliphs, falls very much in what we consider biographical literature. It's a sketch of 39 women who were either wives or consorts to the caliphs under the Abbasid dynasty in Baghdad. The Abbasids were a prominent family, and during what we would call the Middle Ages, was an incredibly powerful ruling empire based in Baghdad, known for its culture, known for the arts, and certainly one of the things that comes through in Sai's description of these women is the culture that kind of dominated the Abbasid court. Now, of course, this being said, this is a very limited culture in the sense of, or limited image of what we get. This is largely confined only to the court at Baghdad. We don't see life for sort of the ordinary person under the Abbasids, which could be quite different. But then again, that could be said about anyone. When we look at, say, for example, the under the reign of Louis XIV in France, we see it often. We talk about it being, this splendorous golden age, and certainly if you were in the court, it would be. For the peasantry, for the merchants, not quite so much. And I think one of the things that we see in this book is, of course, a very small window into Abbasid life, but an important one anyway, particularly for those of us who may be unfamiliar with this aspect of Islamic history. There are a lot of really kind of interesting things about this book that makes it worthwhile to read. The sketches, and I say sketches, and largely because the biographical details of these women's lives are very much just sketches. There are a few, like Inan, who received several pages treatment because they were so well known, not only just for their beauty and kind of for their role as a consort, but also for their accomplishments as women on their own right. Inan was regarded as one of the greatest poets at the Abbasid court, and Alcee talks a lot about how poets from around the empire would come and kind of get her opinion, and kind of be judged by her on the quality of their work. So certainly someone that was, so Inan being incredibly accomplished. But then we get sketches of women that are pretty much just 2 lines long. For example, the consort Zubaydah. And I apologize to anyone that speaks Arabic that's listening to this. I apologize for the accent right off the bat. But she only receives about 2 lines, and all it acknowledges is that fact that she was considered a great beauty of her time, and that is it. So at the same time, as revealing as these biographies are, what we find is it kind of falls into the same kind of concerns that we get even in Western histories, that while on one hand, these are important voices that have been silenced and now are no longer silenced, and yet they still represent a minority view or minority experience. But that does not take from the value. The other thing that's really valuable about this book is that it challenges a lot of, I think, Western stereotypes and Western misconceptions about Arab history and Muslim culture, Muslim history as well. One of the things that, of course, for scholars, when we look at the history of, and I was in quotes, the East, so say the Middle East, Northern Africa, modern day Iran, Iraq, the areas that represented the center of Islamic power, is a very old argument by Edward Said known as Orientalism, that in the West, pretty much for centuries, that the West tends to exoticize the East. And in this case, we'll say the East. If you read anything, particularly any novels from the 16th to even to the 20th century, you're going to find that the East is often portrayed as this exotic place. And very often that exotic is also very much synonymous with erotic as well. Often the idea of the Sultan's harem, and the fact that these cultures were not just cultured, but incredibly sensual. For example, you just have to look at some of the paintings from the 18th, 19th centuries that depict the Sultan's harem. Again, highly eroticized, highly sensual, and of course, completely Western fantasies that in many cases were largely based on on an imaginary culture that didn't exist. And so to have this particular book, I think, is really valuable because it challenges and it really demonstrates that, sure, the sultans and the caliphs were polygamists, would have had many wives, consorts. That is a historical fact. But it challenges the eroticism of it, and it challenges sort of the debauchery that's often assumed by Western historians, Western people, when we consider particularly Arab and Muslim cultures in the past. The other thing that this book does, which I think is incredibly important, is it continues the work of unmuting. nearly a century ago, historians began to move away from the kings and things of history, and to look at sort of the regular people. Again, those people that had often been left out of history. In the 1940s, this was particularly the work of the Annales School that came out of France, particularly historians like Marc Bloch and Emmanuel Laudary, who began to see in history the silent, the muted, peasants, non-historical, what people that we would not consider to be historical actors, and to see that they also contributed to the grand tapestry of history. And I realize that's a really grand phrase, but it's an important one. And of course, among these muted people weren't just peasants in general, but also women. As historians like Bloch and Leroy-Ladurie began to do what we call microhistory, in other words, looking at, again, away from the kings and things, away from sort of the traditional, what was considered traditional history, and looking at lives of villagers, lives of merchants, lives of people that were largely nameless in history, in order to get a better sense of the historical picture. Women also were muted, and as a result, became part of this attempt to reestablish or unmute them, give them back their voice. Natalie Zemon Davis, particularly her work in the 1970s, was incredibly valuable in giving voice back to women in history, and not just the elites, not just a small subsection of your Western European society, but trying to, again, the nameless faces that often were ignored, forgotten, trying to get them voice back. And this is the work we're still doing. We're still trying to unmute many of these voices. And so what Al-Said's book is, and the reason why I think this is a really important one, particularly as an English translation, is it continues to that work in that sort of that vein of unmuting women's voices, particularly in Arab history. Again, I'm not an expert in Arab history. I'm afraid I'm completely unaware of all this, of the sort of work that's being done and being done on this period of time. And I imagine there's an awful lot of very good work that's been done. But for a casual reader like myself, who knows not all that much, this is an important book in unmuting some of those voices and challenging that Orientalist fantasy that Edward Said talked about, that as the West, we misunderstand Islamic history. We misunderstand the cultures, and this is an important book. For a very short window of time. The span of these biographies really only covers about 100 years. But even within that, and even as brief as some of these biographies are of these women, it provides a really interesting and I think a vital insight into this really fascinating part of history that's really not well known here in the West. The book is published by New York University Press as part of their, I'll pull up here just so you can see it, as part of the Library of Arabic Literature. This is I think the 13th book in a 14-book series so far. And so to be commended, the editors are to be commended in trying to provide these really fascinating, interesting windows. Something that certainly I would be picking up more volumes from this collection, just again to better understand what is happening in Arab culture and history. There's no question that I think this is important, considering how fundamental and how impactful Arab history and Arab culture has been on the development of the West. And again, however you want to define the West, and there's a whole other argument there. We can talk about what the West means. I'm just going to use that as a shorthand for now as Western Europe. But the role of the universities, medicine, astronomy, right? The sort of things that we think of, but also just general, some of our own attitudes, how they have been influenced and impacted by our connections, our conflicts, our associations with Arab culture and Islamic cultures as well. So a really important book. One I hope that you get a chance to pick up. Not terribly expensive. Got it from Amazon, I think, for like $20 or something. And as I said, the actual text is only about 87 pages, so it's an easy read for an afternoon, and a book I think you won't regret reading. Anyway, so that's my review of the Consorts of the Caliphs, women at the Baghdad court. Uh, Actually, kind of interesting, just as I realized it's kind of not completely organized, but just kind of cool, is that it's not even about the Baghdad court itself. It's about these women. And I think that's the other thing that's interesting about this book, is that the women who are being written about are the center of their own lives, that they aren't appendages to the caliph, they aren't sort of secondary. These are women that have important primary lives, and they are celebrated for that. So, anyway, Consort of the Caliphs. Highly recommend reading it. Again, a nice, quick, short book, and an important one to understand how to get a better, fuller picture of Islamic history, particularly during the Abbasid period, which, again, using the Judeo-Christian calendar, runs around the 12th to 13th centuries. So at the time when France and England and the German states, Spain, all were in many ways still reestablishing their own cultures, the Abbasids were a flourishing power and a flourishing cultural power at that. Anyway, hope you enjoyed, and hope you come back for the next review, whenever that may be. Keep reading and enjoy.